Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. As you may have guessed from the marketing material and the slide on your screen, the topic is intellective routing, what it does, how it works, and why you need it. My name is Daniel Sims. I am the Customer Success Manager and Product Evangelist here at VanillaSoft, and we are taking you through our newest and, in my opinion, largest, greatest, best, bunch of other explanatory words here. It's my favorite feature that we've released in the 8 years since I've been here, intellective routing. Now, you're probably heard that from the marketing material. Maybe you've looked at it, maybe you've heard of it, but you're probably not too sure what it does and what it can do. So I'm going to take you through it. So first things first, couple of housekeeping items. Uh, this is the topic. This is what we're going to cover. We're going to start with a brief overview of VanillaSoft in case any of you forgot what the product does and what we're all about. We'll talk about how it works today and what's available. Well, I'm saying today, but pre-intellective, and then we'll look at the post-intellective world and what this means for you. So we're going to spend some time on the facets of that. Now, at the end of my presentation, when I'm done talking and out of breath, we're going to have a brief Q&A. Here is VanillaSoft. Now, you're all probably familiar with this screen, or you've seen it somewhere before. This is the caller interface. So quick recap of what VanillaSoft's all about. We are a sales engagement platform. Our focus is on outreach, follow-up, sales cadence, speed to lead, persistence, velocity, a bunch of other buzzwords. But at the end of the day, this is all enabled by our queue-based routing system. What that means, when I, a rep, log in, I'm presented with Anna Huff, my best available lead. I work this lead with all the bells and whistles that we have available. When I'm done, I complete this touch, this interaction, this attempt, I give a result code. These are our dispositions. So what this result code does is two things. One, it tells the system, hey, I'm done with Anna, feed me my next best lead. So I'm going to go ahead and hit LM, left message. Anna's gone. My next best lead is on my screen, Mr. Dave Ridley. The other thing that it's doing is behind the scenes. So because I gave that LM result code, an action is taking place, an action that is telling the system what we do next and where this lead goes next. So that's a really quick recap. I'm going to switch now to the back end where the magic happens to do a recap there. Result codes are the driving force of VanillaSoft. Everyone's probably seen this screen. You should all have been familiar with it. If you're not, you may want to review it. So this is what tells the system how your cadence works. If I give this result, what happens next? Do they go to the end of the queue after 2 hours and then cycle back through? Do they get retried in 5 minutes or 30 minutes and go to the top of the queue? Does someone get assigned as owner? Do they shift to another team or another calling queue? This is what's driving your cadence, the frequency of your follow-ups. And it's keeping the persistency as well because, hey, they're going to keep cycling through until we say, stop, close contact. This is the basic stuff, and it still is the driving force of the system. It's mandatory. You have to give a result code to move to the next lead. And it ties in a lot of other functionalities, things like sending emails automatically, data collection, texting. All of that can be tied and automated through result codes. But one small shortcoming with it is that there's really only a couple sets of priorities. We can put something on a calendar, I can put something to the back of my call queue, or I can put something to the top of my call queue. So it's really good for what it does, but still, I need to know that my agents are calling not just the next lead, but the next best lead. And the best lead may not just be the person I called 3 hours ago, right? There could be other criteria in there. So I'm going to kind of shift gears here and talk about something else, which is lead scoring, which is something that people throw around a lot, and I'll talk about a little bit more, because lead scoring is something that we love, and we wanted to take that into consideration when we're routing you the next best lead is, hey, what makes this a good lead? What makes this a good contact? Why are you following up? It's got to be more than just a result code. It's got to be the result code and other metrics. So enter intellective routing. Now, intellective routing, you can access in your account, assuming that you've upgraded from our legacy system, which I'm going to assume you all have. You access it from the admin side of your account. It's inside of your project under workflow and routing. You have intellective routing. Now, what intellective routing does, where the result codes treat your cadence, your automation, and your persistency, intellective routing treats your prioritization. There are two facets that we're going to look at today. One are the routing filters. Now, this is my favorite, so I'm probably going to spend a lot of time here. But this is a powerful tool that, in my estimation, 100% of our client base, every one of you in attendance today, should be using routing filters. There's no reason not to, or to at least start considering it. The other facet is called geolocation filters. Now, this is more of a specific use case where there's value, but we're still going to talk about it, and it really looks beautiful. So I'm kind of excited to show it off as well. So let's start with the routing filters themselves. Let's create ourselves a new routing filter. So if I click Add Routing Filter, even the name Routing Filter, what does VanillaSoft do? It routes leads to you, right? It routes leads in the queue. And what's a filter do? Everyone knows that's an open question, but I think we all know the answer. It filters things out. So this is a way at a base level of filtering things out of your queue. Now, the way you do this is going to seem similar to some other functions in VanillaSoft. If any of you have used contact management or built reports, this is very similar to how we filter in there, although it's got a little bit of an updated interface. So you see I have one row entry here. The first thing, and by the way, this first part is going to be the how and the like, how do I do this and why? We're going to talk a little bit more about the value add as we get through this. So let's create a filter. If I hit a drop down here, I can select from any number of fields in VanillaSoft. So we've got contact fields. These are our pre-built things like name, address, etc. Call history fields. We know what these are. This is what happens when you give a result code. Things like when it was last called, who called it, what result was given, and the all-important result count, i.e. how many times has it been resulted in the system. We also have your other information or custom fields. So anything that you've built out, any data point that you've built out that you're bringing information into or capturing during a call can be fed in here and filtered on. We can also filter by phone fields, and last but not least, email data, such as whether they opened it or not and what email was sent to them. So any combination of these fields can be built out. So let's do a basic one. I'm going to go by state. So let's say I select state as my field. I now can select an operator, and this is where it gets very similar to contact management if you've used that. I can say state is equal to, and then I can select a value over here, Colorado. So I'm now filtering for the state of Colorado. I could also say everything but Colorado by saying not equal to. I can say in or not in, which is the same as equal to, except it's more than one. So now in addition to Colorado, I could say Colorado and Florida and Georgia. Let's filter for all three. We can also use contains or does not contain, starts with, ends with, blank, not blank. And this field is reactive based on what you're looking at. So if I'm looking at, let's say, a date, add a date, and I want to say, I want a date between a certain, this date and that date. It now changes my selector into a calendar picker. So I can say between the 19th and the 29th. Now, I'm probably not going to find anything because nothing's been added in the future that I know of, but you get the idea. This reacts. And same thing if it's a numerical value, right? If I'm going off of something like revenue, maybe I want to say anything that's greater than a value of X, right? A value of $1 million annual revenue. That's what I want to filter for. So at a base level, that's how these filters work. On its own, pretty cool. If any of you used, again, I'm going to say it, our legacy filter system, because we did have a very, very basic system back in the day. This is already a big deal that we can do all these various comparisons. Now, the other thing that we can do, you see this little plus sign to the left. As you might have guessed, that lets me add new things. But there's two ways I can add additional fields. I can say and I can say or. So and is pretty simple. I say email is not blank. So I'm only filtering for contacts that have an email address and they have to match this other criteria. So I could say and in select states. Let's go back to that one. So and it has to be in one of these three states. Now, if I change this and to an or, it changes the behavior. So now it's going to say, all right, pull me in anything that has an email address where the email field is not blank, or it's got to be in one of these three states. So if either of these criteria match, it'll find it. Now, where it gets cool is I can start adding on to these, right? So I don't have to just do one or one. I could do one and a third one, or another one and another one, or another one and another one. So you get the idea. You can get pretty complex with this. Now, I'm going to blow your minds, I hope, This is what we would call a basic routing filter. Even though I've got all these options, I'm going to clear some of these out just because it's messy. Even though we have all these options, this is still a basic filter. There's a cool button in the top right that you're all going to want to click when you start playing with this called Enable Advanced Mode. It sounds scary. There's even a little window that makes it even scarier because it says, oh, don't do it. It's going to convert it. It's going to become advanced forever. Don't be afraid. Trust me, it'll be okay. So click Confirm. We are now in advanced mode, and this is what kicks it up to 11. This is where we're going to start talking about some real world use cases. And you heard me kind of tease a little bit about lead scoring before. I like to think of this as lead scoring evolved. So let's talk about what this does first, and then we'll talk about why it's so important. So instead of just having the one filter, now I see that I've still got my filter here, email or state, but it's now called priority one. And there's a little section above it. I can now add priorities, and there's a cool little checkbox at the very bottom. So a few things have changed here. One is we introduced the concept of priorities, and this is big. So the basic filter said, filter out anything where the email's not blank and the state's not one of these three values. By introducing this priority concept, I can now say, hey, any leads where we have an email that are in, or they're in one of these three states, I want to call them first. They're my top priority. My second priority could be a different subset of leads. It could be contacts where the title contains sales. I'm looking for VPs of sales, sales managers, sales representatives, etc. My third priority could be another set of data. So what this is doing is it's like creating multiple lists or multiple reports, but they're stacked on top of each other and they react based on the data. So this plays very nicely with your sales cadence. So now I'm going to be routed my priority one contacts first if they're available, then my priority two, then my priority three. It's going to go in the row. And now if a priority one becomes available, I'm going to call that priority one. So if I had a retry in 1 hour or an end of queue 1 hour, if it happened to be priority one, well, I'm going to see that before I see a priority two or priority three. So this lets you start stacking what is most important. And the coolest thing, well, not the coolest, one of the many cool things about it is that this is all updated second by second, actually several times a minute. So it's happening regularly, meaning that we are constantly checking these values. So if I suddenly speak to someone and capture their title, maybe I didn't have it to begin with, but one of my, let's say a BDR gets in touch with them, they qualify them, they say, oh, okay, you're a sales manager, great. They update the title. All of a sudden, that shifts them up from whatever they were at before into priority two, because we now know, hey, they have our target title. So that starts to get pretty cool. This is huge, and we'll talk about why it's so important as we go through. Now, that's not the only thing that gets added in here. So in addition to the priorities, we solve a big pain point, because one of the pain points in a classic filter is you run out, right? So even here, I call through priority one, I call through priority two. If there's no leads that match these two criteria, I'm out of leads to call, right? It gives you that dreaded there are no more leads to be routed message. So what you can do now is check this box to say, hey, let's route the remaining contacts as a bottom priority. So this makes sure that you can prioritize your contacts, but you don't restrict them. You don't constrict them. So your reps are always able to reach out to your full pool of leads. But Dan, you might say, I kind of want to do that, but I still want to make sure they don't call certain types of records. Well, I've got good news for you. We can still create what's called a top level filter. By the way, this is all easier than it sounds. I'm highlighting every feature. We're going to look through how simple it is to make your first filter in just a bit. So don't panic, stay with me, folks. So I can create a top level filter. Now, what this is going to do is it filters everything below. You can kind of see from the visual aids here. So if I said my top level filter, oh boy, let's say it's some lead sources, right? So I only want people who are using this filter to call these selected lead sources. Well, I've just done that. They're only going to call them if they are one of these lead sources. Let's put a couple more in there. Let's do email blasts and Google as well. So now it's saying, okay, we only want to call contacts in these lead sources. Contacts that are in these lead sources, we're going to call in this order. Here are my priority ones, priority twos, and then if we run out of either of those, we route the remaining. So this is how we start to build more advanced filters. Now there's one last thing that I'm going to talk about, and that is how involved you can get. If any of you in the webinar today are data nerds, this is for you. I'm a data nerd, so this is also for me. So we talked about how I can make email or state, or email and state. We can actually do groups of ands and ors in addition to these ands and ors. So I could, for example, say priority 1 is email, not blank, and state is one of those 3. Or I could do a combination of first, let's think, prefix starts with doctor, maybe. And we could have another criteria of company does not equal, I don't know, IBM. And then I could create an or, and we could have that in here for, or we have a lead status of qualified. And then I can create an and group that's going to conjoin the 2 of these. So it's now going email and state, or prefix and company, or lead status, and this other set of criteria. It can get pretty complex, but the reason I'm highlighting this is that there's no limit to the power that this can give you. So a lot of people talk about reporting on KPIs. A lot of people talk about your metrics and how important they are. They talk about your sales personas. They talk about, and this leads back to lead scoring, right? Let's talk about that briefly. Lead scoring. What is it? It's taking these metrics, these data points, and giving it a number, usually from 0 to 100. That's how most lead scoring works. So I can say, hey, because this person has this job title and the company has this, more than this many employees, and they have a revenue that exceeds our target, I'm going to give them a score of 88. So you give that lead score, great. Now what? Nothing happens based on that in a traditional system, right? You get a score, it doesn't do much. There's no next step to it. So that's why I call intellective routing, that's my pet name for it, I call it lead scoring evolved, because we're taking the same data points you would use to give that 88 score, to say, hey, this person rates a 56 out of 100. But instead of just giving you a number that you can't really do anything with, you take those metrics and you say, hey, the number is 1. My first priority, if we've got any leads that match our persona, that are qualified, that have all of these requisites that make them a viable candidate for my business, I want to be calling them first and most often. When they're available, they should take priority over the rest. Our secondary target are contacts that maybe don't match this criteria exactly. Maybe there's pieces of them. Instead of ands, maybe we go to ors. We have other items in there. So I'm going to actually go ahead and jump out of this one just to pull up an example priority filter here. This is one that we had made before. And I'll kind of talk through what it's doing. So in this case, what I'm looking at, my top priority is any contact from one of these 3 designated lead sources that I've called 1 or fewer times. So things I haven't reached out to that often. Or I want to call anything from one of those 3 lead sources where we have an email address. Because if we have an email, they're a high value to me. I can engage through them, not just through phone, but through email as well. Or if I haven't touched them yet, well, they're a high priority. But on top of these lead sources and on top of this criteria, I have target titles. Their title has to contain the keyword president or CEO. Could be one, could be the other, could be both, could be CEO/owner. This is going to find it. Could be president of sales or president in charge of X or vice president of Y. I'm going to find it with my title key here. Anything that matches this criteria, both of these sets together, that's my A lead. That's my top priority. My second priority is anything matching a wider array of lead sources, but that's been pre-qualified. That's either qualified or hot based on the status it's been assigned. Or I built in another criteria because let's say in this hypothetical, I've just used a report to say, hey, or we're doing a campaign and I know that this vendor, we can beat them on price. We can beat them on price because when they offer this certain package, we can undercut them, offer the same value, but lower dollar amount. So I'm going to say if they're with competitor 2, and this is something that we have, again, I'm just filtering by various fields that I have in the system, and their current pricing is more than $20,000, well, that's the price I know I can beat. So let's prioritize any contacts we get that match that criteria. Let's put them at the top so we can do a more focused campaign. My third priority, so you get the idea, and I can keep building this out, adding, tweaking, reprioritizing. Let's say for some reason, my priority 2 is actually more important than my priority 1. You just shift that bad boy around, right? I just swap places with them. So my priority 2 is now my top priority. Maybe I want to filter out anything that doesn't match these credentials. It can become my top level priority. All of this is very dynamic, very simple to use. And then when you're done, let me get rid of this blank one here. When you're done, what's going to happen is you calculate your contact count. So what this is going to do is it's going to run the numbers and say, how many available in the pool do you have, right? So it breaks down by priority, by filter, how many contacts you're left with, right? This is how deep your pool is, basically. So I can look at that and say, man, this is kind of restrictive, right? This probably is not good as a top level filter because there's 27 leads in the pool. That's not very much for them to call on. So I maybe need to shift this back down to a priority. Now we can recalculate, and now we can see some better numbers that I can work with here. So that is the premise of these priority filters. Let's build another one. I'm going to give another example. I'm not going to save the changes here. I'm going to add a new filter. And this is a live example that we've seen clients use. So here is a scenario for you. We're an insurance company. So I'm going to call this insurance filter. So we sell health insurance, life insurance, doesn't matter. But my agents who sell insurance are licensed in specific states. Maybe there's certain types of leads they're allowed to call and other types they aren't. And I really want a priority. Speed to lead is huge. And the more times we've touched a record without closing it and getting a final answer, the less valuable it gets. So with that scenario, I can start doing something like this. I can create a top level filter where I can say, all right, the state is going to be the states the agent's licensed in. Because these filters, by the way, they can be assigned on a group basis, on a team basis, or individually to each user. So my salesperson A can have a totally different filter than salesperson B and a totally different filter than salesperson C, or they could all be running off the same filter. So let's run with this hypothetical. I'm going to select a bunch of things here. That's good enough. So these are the states I'm licensed in. So I want to make sure I'm filtering out and only calling these states. But on top of that, maybe there's another set of criteria that I need to focus on. So maybe what I need to do, let's say that, actually, you know what? We're going to expand this top level filter later once we add our priorities. So let's start doing that first. So first and foremost, new web leads. You know, there's a checkbox if you get live leads, if any of you do, that rounds them as a top priority. This always takes precedence, right? This is always going to come in first and kind of ignore your first priority. It's basically priority 0.5 instead of priority 1. So after that, but it still respects your top level filter. So after that, let's keep with that theme. Let's say I'm getting these live web leads. So I want to say anything that was added as a web lead. So anything where the ad username is incoming web lead, that's my top priority, but not just any lead. I want to be breaking this down by how often I've called them. So I'm going to say, and by the way, the cool thing about this selector, you don't just have to scroll. If you start typing, it's going to find out anything that matches. Because I want to use result count. So just by typing RES, it found me result count. So I'm going to say result count is less than or equal to 1. So I'm calling web leads that have been called 1 or fewer times. Now my second priority, probably going to look about the same. I'm going to say add username equal to incoming web lead. But this time, I'm going to do result count less than or equal to, let's say 3. So now my second priority are web leads that have been called effectively 2 or 3 times, right? And then I can keep adding priorities and expanding this out farther and farther, adding more criteria if I need to. But effectively, the result count, by the way, this is a big one we see used a lot with our clients who are using Intellective Routing, just because it's the number of touches. A contact, even if it's a good contact, there's a certain point where a contact that's been called or touched 50, 60, 70 times probably has a lower priority than maybe based on metrics, a less valuable contact that's only been called once or twice. Right? You have a higher likelihood of getting through the person that you've only touched once or twice. They're fresher. So you can build that into these priorities. Now let's add another scenario onto our top level filter where maybe there's certain lead sources that they shouldn't call just yet. So I might say if the lead source, we want to filter out things. So lead source not equal to, let's say not in, let's say there's more than one. So the lead source is not in blasts or Google. Those ones are my big bads. I want my closers to call them. So I'm gonna have a different filter for my closers. These are maybe for my entry level representatives, but at a certain point, maybe I want these released. So I could say lead source is not one of those values, and the result count is, so we're gonna filter out where they're that or they're less than or equal to 5. So once they've been touched 5 or more times, well, now this criteria no longer takes effect. So now email blasts and Google leads can be routed through the reps. And then we can route the rest as a last priority. Again, we're getting pretty far into the weeds, but I wanted to take you through kind of the process of how you can build this out. So as you discover more key metrics, as you discover things that are valuable to you, if you're tracking data, if that is being sent to you from your marketing automation platform, maybe I build a priority that says, hey, they've downloaded a white paper and they entered their email address and that triggered to VanillaSoft. So now top priority. This is just to give you an idea of how this can work. We're going to look into more. I'm actually going to save this filter. So I'm going to calculate my contact count. Yeah, so I have no priority ones, no priority twos, because right now I have no leads that have been called fewer than 3 times that were web leads, but I've got 43 contacts in this filter based on the top level filter. That's good enough for now. So I'm going to save this bad boy. So that's the routing filter. I know we kind of got, hopefully you're all still awake. I hope you do wake up because this next one looks real pretty. So routing filter, hugely important. I think it's universal, perfectly complementary to result codes. Now the counterpoint to your routing filter is geolocation filter. So geolocation filter, as the name suggests, is based on the location or the geography of the contact. It is based off of the latitude and longitude on a contact. Those are 2 fields that we need to have to use this, and it's because it's pinpoint accurate. I'll show you what I mean. So I've clicked on Manage Geolocation Filters. That's pulled up a map of the good old US of A for me. So right now what it's doing is it's struggling to pull in all my contacts. It's trying to find out, well, where in the world are these leads, right? Where are they on the map? It's now finished the calculation, and look at that. Isn't that beautiful? You can kind of see here where my leads are. So these little blue dots represent a single contact. So I don't have many leads in Utah. I've got a high concentration in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and quite a few down here in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, in that location. So it creates a heat map for me, telling me where my contacts exist in the world, in the country, wherever I'm looking. Now what you can do is, just like a Google map, you can start zooming in. Oh, my mouse wheel is going crazy here. So I can start zooming in, click and drag here, and it starts breaking that heat map out, where before it was red clusters of like 60 and 50, it's broken it out into some smaller clusters, right? Now I can see those blue individual leads. And as I keep zooming in and getting more and more granular, which you'll want to do, I even see the streets, right? So I can even see, hey, I've got a contact on Weber Avenue, right? So I can see the details of where these records are located. Now, where it gets cool is seeing this is valuable. You can get a quick glance of an idea of where your leads reside. But now you want to call contacts in certain areas. So what I can do is I can add a geolocation filter, put my artistry skills to use, and start drawing. So if I click first, it puts a pin. So this is my starting point. And what I'm going to do is draw a polyhedral design around the contacts that I want to focus on. So you can see everything in the shaded area. These are contacts that I've captured with my filter. So I can now say only call the contacts that are within this filter. And we'll just call this test filter. So that's pretty cool. So where you really see value with this feature is if you're doing things like appointment setting. If you have an inside sales team, but also an outside sales team, right? If you're going on site, you can start pathing and getting directional routing for where my leads are at. Because another thing you can do, I'm going to go ahead and redraw this. So let's say we're doing something different. I'm going to go from here to here to here. Sorry, I talk to myself sometimes. So let's do something like this. So I've got a whopping 3 contacts in here, not too many. But let's say I had more. Let's say I was more granular. And let's say I was going on site to Lewiston. So what I want to do is be calling the contacts in some sort of smart order. right? Because one of the problems with calling things in a wide area or doing radial-based geographic calling is that you might be I might be having a meeting with this person way over here on Grove Street, and then someone over here in Auburn, and then bouncing around the entire countryside. What you can do with this feature is enable directional routing, which gives you this cool little flag here. And where you plant the flag, that effectively acts as your starting point. So anyone who's using this filter, anyone who uses this test filter here, they start routing outward from that location. So this blue dot gets routed first, and then this second dot, and then my third dot. So again, very powerful, very cool tool if you're doing appointment setting or anything on site. Even if you're not, just from a macro view, as we start zooming out, there's still some value in here, right? Because I can still see, well, where are my contacts? I could draw a larger graph. I can start using this for territory distribution, for example. And in that case, I just wouldn't use directional routing. Now, another piece to this is how it relates to the routing filters. So geolocation filters happen to play very nicely with routing filters, and you can even preview what's going to be available. So I've got my tiny little drawing with 3 leads in there. I can see how that looks with different routing filters overlaid on top of it. So that priority filter, it's probably going to look about the same, honestly, because nothing's filtered out, right? I've prioritized leads, but I haven't said don't call certain leads. So I can see everything here. Now, if I select my insurance filter, whoa, so we can see these gray contacts. They are not going to route based on this filter. So this is a way for me to preview, do these play well together? Because that was always a challenge, is seeing, hey, if I have this filter that's filtering by these states, but these contacts aren't in that state, well, what's going to happen? So I can show them as gray dots, or I can even hide them. And just based on the states I picked, I happen to know that none of the contacts there are going to be in my tiny little drawing. So I'm going to have to zoom out if I want to see, well, what contacts would be eligible to route in this. So I can see there's this one contact there. There's another one over, it looks like New Hampshire, Minneapolis. We had a few in there. I remember that, like Minnesota. So this is kind of starting to give me an idea of what contacts I have. We have a good presence in Florida, so maybe I want to focus there with this particular filter. And then again, I can start zooming in there. Maybe I just want to hide what's not relevant. So I've now filtered down my map, and I can start focusing from there. So again, it's a very pretty feature. It's excessively valuable, but it's valuable in a specific way, right? It's valuable if you're doing appointment setting and if you're going on site. That's really the primary value, or if you distribute by territory. The nice thing about the other functionality, the routing filters, is that they are universally valuable. So we're going to do a little bit more how to, because now we've seen how to build routing filters, how to build geolocation filters. How do we actually use them now? So once I've built a filter, I need to assign that filter. And it's going to surprise you where you go to do that. You go to filter assignment. So I have 2 ways of assigning filters. One is by user, where each individual user in the project can have their own filter sets. The other option is by team, where I use a filter for each team. Now, teams, as you might remember, they're effectively where your leads reside. These are your buckets, sub-campaigns, call queues. Think of them as you would wish. I'm going to go by user, though. So one thing that we can do, in addition to assigning a filter to a user, is I can make user-specific filters. So if I click on New User Filter, it's about the same as if I clicked on Add a New Filter on the Intellective Routing side. So it just lets me create a filter, but this is just for my pal, Daniel. Now I can copy routing filters, meaning that if I said, oh, man, I want to use that insurance filter because he has some different states than I built in that filter, but I don't want to build the whole thing. Good news, you don't have to. You copy that from my insurance filter. I'm going to click Apply, Confirm. Boom, it's loaded in my filter exactly as is. So I've got all my priorities intact, everything is there, and now I can just maybe come in and mess with what states he's allowed to call in. Maybe I remove a few, maybe need to add a few more in, and then give it a name, Dan Insurance Filter, and we're done. Boom, simple, piece of cake. So I've now created a user-specific filter for Dan. Now I can assign the filter. So I've created the filter, Dan Insurance Filter, so I can assign that one or one of my primary filters. These filters are shared across all users. This one is going to be specific to Daniel. So Daniel has access to it, Christy does not. So I can assign Dan's filter to him, And it's going to tell me, hey, this is what it filters down to, right? It filters down to 51. None are available right now. Now that's an important thing to see. So available now is letting you know, well, what's it actually going to capture? What will it route? If I hit save here, what happens to Dan? Poor guy's going to run out of leads. And the reason it is because he's in a team where there aren't very many leads. But this is a good preview for you because as you're building these, as you're about ready to assign, always check and see, well, what is this actually going to do? Because the worst feeling in the world is that you make a really great filter, you feel really good about it, you assign it, you hit save, and then you get a call from your agent saying, I have no more leads to be routed. What happened? You broke it. And really, you would have. So you can assign the routing filters. You can also assign the geolocation filters. So I can assign downtown Dallas if I want. And it's going to play together. So I can see routing filter A leaves me with 51 leads. My proximity filter, geolocation filter, has found 0 leads because I don't have any in downtown Dallas, evidently. So now I'm left with 0 leads. This is not my desired outcome. So I would want to pull a different geolocation filter or just not use one for the time being. So this is how you can start assigning filters. Now, once I hit save, it's done. The filter's assigned. So Daniel's filter is now assigned to him. The next time I come here, it's going to reflect that. Dan insurance filter is what he is using. I can still expand it. It will recalculate and let me know how many are in the queue right now. So let's say that you like building filters. I do. It's pretty fun to do, but maybe you don't have time or your agents need to be a little bit more nimble than building a filter lets them be. Even with the dynamic prioritization, maybe they still need to be able to pivot or switch throughout the day. Well, good news. You can give caller side access to the filters. So I've actually done this. I've been very generous. So first and foremost, for the routing filter side, you can select what fields they're allowed to filter by. I've given a bunch, but not all. So they can filter by the status, by the title, by the city, by the state, etc. But some things they can't filter by are last result code or added. No, they can't filter by added date. Shoot. And they can't filter by last result code. Crap. So let me get rid of that. So I can remove and restrict what they're allowed to filter by, or conversely, I can expand it, right? So it just pulls up this window here. I can search, again, it filters it down, so I can search for results if I wanted to, or IP address, and it will let me grant or deny access to filter by any of the selected fields. Now, as far as who has access, we can either give all users access to both, we can give some users access to one and some access to the other, or the default is no users have access to either. So they can build their own filters. If I just gave them access and I said, you know what, you can't access any of these fields, then all they'd be able to do is switch their filter. So I could build them 5, 6, 8, 20, 50 different filters and they could switch between them, but they couldn't actually create, modify, edit, delete them themselves. So those are a few control options that you've got at your disposal. Okay, so that's kind of dealing with the nitty gritty. We talked a little bit about the value add, but really what the core goal here is to think about is that this is flipping it on its head, right? We had the old school, and I shouldn't say old school because it's still vital. We have the cadence. This is something VanillaSoft was built on. This is the core of our product. You touch a record, what happens next? You disposition a record, what's the next action? What's the next item? This is still vital. It's still hugely important. But now you've kicked it to the next level with intellective routing. Even if you don't have these advanced metrics, right? Even if you can't come in here and say, I want to filter by revenue or by competitors or by potential value or estimated close rates or anything like that, even if you don't have those metrics or you don't have them yet, there's still value in here. Just being able to prioritize leads that have been called the most versus the least, that's huge. This is valuable. Any business model can get value from this functionality. This also means that let's say there's temporarily even, because this filter, that's the big thing, is temporary. If I don't want this filter to be applied anymore, I just unassign it or I remove it. And then everything gets opened back up. So if you temporarily don't want to call certain types of contacts, let's say for some reason, web leads from a certain source are coming in and they're missing their phone numbers. There's an issue with the integration. Well, we can just say, hey, no problem. Anything from this one lead source, we don't want to route, right? So we're going to say route anything as a top level only route things that are not equal to Hoover. Let's say Hoover was the one messing me up, right? So we're going to filter out all our Hoover leads until this gets resolved, right? Simple, easy to do. So the takeaway here, what I want you all to do, and we'll talk about this more. We're going to get to the Q&A in just a moment. We got about 20 minutes left here, so that should give us ample time for Q&A. But what we're going to leave with, what our action item is going to be, is homework. Everyone's favorite thing. You all attended this webinar thinking, man, I hope that guy gives me some homework. I'm not a busy person. I need something to do. Look, I know we are all busy. This is an added task, but it is so vital. This is what's going to give you the edge on your competition. I honestly believe that. We've seen it. Every client of ours who has used this, who has started leveraging it, who has built this, has reported nothing but positive gains. You can massage it, you can adjust it. Maybe you don't build it perfect the first time, but it's so easy to modify. It's so easy to work with. It's so easy to undo, revert, A/B test. There's no reason not to be using this. So your homework is to build an intellective routing filter. Even if you built one 6 months ago, again, you might have stumbled onto this. We've had it for a while. You might have stumbled onto it, not been too sure about what it does, got in here, looked at all these different options and said, boy, I'm not sure. I don't want to mess things up. Things are working okay. Maybe you made a really basic one. Get back in there, roll up your sleeves, take half an hour, build something. This is vital. This is why you're using VanillaSoft over a competitor's product. All right. A lot of CRMs out there, they're CRMs, right? They're relationship managers. We're relationship builders, and this lets you target who you're building those relationships with. So it is critical. So that is your homework. And if you do the homework, we got a special present for you. So we'll reveal that later. For right now, let's shift into our Q&A. I'm going to pop open the chat window here. Not too many questions rolled in. Folks, if you have any questions, type them in now. This is your chance. All right, so let's look at our first question from Emily. Without enabling the advanced mode for routing filter, can you still select route remaining contacts as last priority? Very good question. The answer is no. So when we're on what we'll call a standard filter, right? When you go to add routing filter, this is our standard filter. I give it a name, I select what criteria I want to filter by, and that is that. There's no route remaining, right? So if I need route remaining, I click on enable advanced mode. Now, when you click on this, it can be intimidating. There is a warning message, and here's the reason. If you have again, I'm going to call it a standard filter. If you've got a standard filter, if you've been using it, if you then convert it to an advanced filter and you click confirm and then you save that, there is no going back. An advanced filter cannot become a standard filter. A standard filter can always be upgraded to advanced, but it cannot go the other way. So what I would recommend, let's say that you're in that situation where you have a filter, maybe it's being used today, and you're understandably a little bit nervous. Let's say priority filter, it is being used by at least one person. I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to mess that person up. So don't. Copy it. Click the copy icon. It'll say, well, perfect, done. You now have a copy. Break this one, mess with it. Put this one in advanced mode. Try some things out. Maybe even try assigning it. Assign it to yourself, assign it to a rep, do some A/B tests, whatever. Clone the filter. Don't break the original. Leave the original. It's always better to, to keep something as a backup, just in case. But in this one, you can proceed to advanced. Now, speaking of advanced, to finish answering your question, Emily, once you go to advanced mode, that is when you get route remaining contacts as a last priority. You'll also notice that whatever you had built in the basic filter becomes priority one. Because really, if I don't say route remaining contacts, if I only have priority one and nothing else, it's effectively a top level filter. However, you will be able to say route remaining contacts. So then you can just say, hey, let's call these first if available. And if not, if we run out of our priority one leads, then we call the rest. So great question from Emily. Hopefully that answered it. If it did not, let me know. Okay, let me mark that as answered and go to the next. This one's from Travis. Okay, now this is one I was wondering if we'd hit. So Travis asks, for some reason, intellective routing is not even listed as an option in the workflow section. Here is why, Travis. It is because you are still on our legacy version. So I say legacy, we have called it lovingly classic in the past. Legacy is the old VanillaSoft. About 3 years ago now, we released this interface. This is the new VanillaSoft, or rather just VanillaSoft. If you're on legacy, even if it looks like this is the new interface, right? You log in, you see what I'm seeing. Hey, it looks the same, Dan. We have the same functionality. There's actually one extra step. On your account page, there's a checkbox that you need to check that says move all users to new. We can only offer intellective routing on accounts that are fully converted to new because it uses an entirely different table set and database. Because of the speed, because that we're constantly checking in the back end, have contacts been modified? Do they match this criteria? Should they be reprioritized? It's constantly shifting in real time. It's a big undertaking. We couldn't build it on the old system. We had to rebuild the system. So you will, Travis, need to convert your account completely to new. I will say once you go to our current modern interface and you get access to Intellective Routing, there is no going back. So if you have any stragglers who like the old version for whatever reason, maybe think it through, but highly recommend it. This is bolted together with our new edition. So great question. Next question. Oh, and I forgot to mention it. This is a good one. Gordon says, I missed most of it. Is it recorded? Yes, we did record it. The recording will go out probably later in the week, pending how long it takes us to get it converted and put up on YouTube. But yes, we will send out a recording to everyone. So thank you for asking, Gordon. Sorry for not mentioning that earlier. Sean asks, when drawing the geographic polyhedral, is it possible to edit the shape without a full redrawing, excise certain areas from the hole and such? Not so much. If you're doing, so this is, to bring it up on the screen, if I go manage geolocation filters, so what Sean is asking is if I start drawing something and I put a line in the wrong place, let's say, can I revert that line or erase that line? And the answer at this point is no. You would just have to start over. So if you're like me and you're not great at drawing, you might mess up. You might not encapsulate those leads that you meant to. You would just have to redraw. So if I start going boop, 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 and then boop, and I say, shoot, I meant to get these two and I didn't. I can't just come in and modify this. I would just have to go, let's redraw it and make my net a little bit wider. Great question, Sean. Okay, Tony asks, does the filter override contact ownership or can it? Nice. So the answer is no and no. Contact ownership. So if a lead is owned, let me pull up a lead. If a contact is owned by a user, what the rule states is that it can only route to that user. So if this is owned by Bob, now Bob is the only one that this lead can route to. So others maybe can search the lead or bring it up manually, but routing wise, it will only route to Bob. So this is important to note because if your contacts are all owned and you've got filters, there are two things that can happen which you don't want to happen. One, the filter might prevent me from contacting this record. If I've filtered out, let's say Florida leads, and I'm the owner, I'm Bob, well, shoot, I'm the owner, so I'm the only one who's going to call this person, but my filter says I can't because they're in Florida. So that's something to bear in mind. Contact owner still remains relevant with the filters. So the rule is if you own it, it will only route to you, but that's no guarantee that it will route to you. It just can only route to you. It cannot route to someone else. A filter could still prevent it from routing even to you, the owner. So great question, Tony. This is the questions are flooding in. I love it. Okay. And by the way, if my answers don't really answer, just reiterate your question or elaborate. We'll get to it, I swear. So next question is from Ernest. Would we be able to replay this lesson later? Yes. Yep, we will have the recording. You will be sent that, Ernest. Next is from Judy. Do you think it works better overall to do routing filter by team or by individual user if users all have different states? So this is going back to my example of an insurance filter where we have states because each agent might be licensed. I could have a license in 5 states. My colleague might only be licensed in 2, and they could be completely different states. There's 50 of them, right? There's a bunch of states. So in this example, we would actually want to and more or less need to do it by user, and that is the best practice. So I could create this insurance filter, and let's say I would use this as my template, right? I've got a few states in here, but I know each agent's going to have different states, right? They're not all going to be licensed in these 6 states. So what I would then do On the filter assignment section is I would go to my users. Let's say I go to my pal Daryl here. I would create a new user filter for Daryl. And again, I would just copy and load in my insurance filter and then tweak it as needed. So I would then expand or restrict these states, add in states, remove states, etc. And then the example, if you guys remember that far back, if you're still awake with me, the example I gave is maybe that these certain lead sources are only for closers until they've been touched at least 5 times. My closers get the first 5 attempts on them. Well, shoot, Daryl might be my closer, so maybe I don't need this filter. And I say, hey, you call whatever you want, including our best top shelf leads that you will get first dibs on. So great question there, Judy. Bessie asks, what's the difference between intellective and rule-based routing? Ooh, I like it. I like it. These are 2 advanced features. So I'll tell you the difference. Intellective routing, right? We kind of know what it does. It is prioritization. It is stacking your contacts, but it's not changing the action. What I mean by that is this. So think about result actions. Let's think about the core 2 result actions. Retry, end of queue. End of queue is self-explanatory, puts it to the end of the queue, to the back of the list. Retry does the reverse. It puts it to the top of the queue, to the top of the list. Now with these priority filters, the way those interact, it's still the same, but different. So the way that they interact with one another is about the same. A retry will still come ahead of an end of queue. However, it will only do that in its priority. So let's look at priority 1. I've got 36 leads. If 5 of those leads are retries and 5 of them are end of queues, well, the 5 that are retries get called first, and the 5 that are end of queues will get called last. However, they're still priority 1 leads, so they're still being called ahead of priority 2 leads, even something that's like a retry, right? So a retry priority 2 will be called after an end of queue priority 1. I know I'm saying a lot of words here, and I do apologize. So that's how intellective routing works, and that's how this compares. Now, rule-based routing, all that rule-based routing is doing, I shouldn't say all that it does, it's a pretty cool tool. It's determining an action based on different criteria sets, but it's still an action, meaning it's end of queue, retry, or close. So if I look at a rule-based routing, I can say for this criteria, for this length of time or this many attempts, retry every 3 hours, or end of queue every 6 hours. But it's still a retry, end of queue, or close at the end of the day. So the behavior there doesn't change. It takes a dynamic action, but we still look at that action. So even if it's rule 64, which means retry in 6 months, that's a retry. It's going to go to the top of its priority 6 months later. But remember, when I say top of its priority, that's not the top priority necessarily. That just means if it happens to fall, let's say, under the priority 3 bucket, it will go to the top of the priority 3 bucket behind all your priority 1s and 2s. Hopefully that made sense. I might have lost myself a little bit there, but I swear the recording, you can listen to it, you can slow me down a little bit, it'll be better. Okay. Paul asked, yep, another one for the recording. We will get the recording, no sweat there. When you say the recording will it be sent to all account admins or everyone who registered today? It will be sent to everyone that we sent the invite to. So if you receive the invite to attend, you will get a copy of the recording. Next is, how do I see the available contacts in geolocation filter? My current contacts are not showing on the map. If you are not seeing contacts, so this is an important key piece, and it's something that's easily correctable, but likely something that will have to be corrected. I've mentioned it kind of passingly early on. Geolocation filters, where we put the dots, where we find the contacts, is based on latitude and longitude, or longitude. You say it either way. Those are 2 fields you need to bring into the system. Each lead has a latitude field and a longitude field. So if your contacts don't have latitude and longitude, this will just be a blank map, a nice looking map, but a blank map. You're not going to see your leads. Now, there's a lot of services out there, and we can help direct you to a few. If you'd like, you can reach out to our sales team, and they can mention a couple. There's a lot of systems out there that will give you latitude and longitude, meaning that you can export a list of contacts, run them through their scrubber, and it feeds you back, here's the lat longs for all these contacts. You can then feed them back in and populate your map. So it's an easy thing to overcome, but if you don't already have lat and long, your map will be blank. The reason, by the way, for that, you might be saying, well, why can't we go by zip code or something else? Well, zip code, you still can do proximity-based routing on zip code, but the problem is a zip code could encompass miles land territory. So it's not that exact, right? You'd be seeing a bunch of these instead of seeing one contact. And as we zoom in, like if I go into Dallas more and more and more and more, come on, it's going to keep breaking these contacts out into smaller and smaller groups. But if we had this based on zip code, I would just have one group for a designated area, right? It would not be granular enough for our needs. That's why we use latitude, longitude. Tony asked, what's the best way to load the coordinates? Is it manual or is it otherwise? Yeah, so basically it will be batch is going to be best. Obviously, if you can be fed those, depending on how your lead delivery looks like today, if you can be fed them, that's great. What you can do is you can build a quick query. You can pull out the address info. So street address, city, state, and zip are what they're going to need. Do an export, feed that through again to a third party that's going to go through that list and give you the lat long coordinates. And then you can re-import them and do an update. So basically you can match an update on the contact ID and just append the latitude and longitude. So is there a way to look at a record? Paul asks this, is there a way to look at a record and see that a filter has been applied to that record? You can't see that from looking at a contact. So the filters themselves will tell you how many contacts they're encapsulating, right? What contacts are being captured by the filter in raw numbers. If you want to see, hey, would a contact apply in this filter? That would be more like a query, right? A contact management query, you can rebuild exactly what you'd build in the filter and query to see, well, let me get a list of the names of people that are in here. Really what the filter is doing is more based on the workflow, based on the routing, based on performance. It's not meant to be something that you would then use to report on or to pull data out of, right? You'd still use our queries or reporting tools to get your reports and do your data mining. And then once you've mined that data, you would action on it with the intellective routing. Gordon asks, without Latin long, we can't use the map drawing. That's correct. You do not have access to map drawing without latitude and longitude for the reasons I just explained. That was probably an earlier question before I started rambling on. What you still can do, and this you can do just with zip code, it's less exact. What you can do from the caller side, if you grant your users access, by the way, this is just what it looks like if I go to the caller side. I can select a filter, I can create a filter, I can select proximity. I can also route contacts near a zip code. So if I plug in a Colorado zip code here and I say within 30-mile radius and I click apply, it does give me a little bit of data. So it kind of tries and finds something here for me. But again, without the lat long, nothing's going to be that precise. So it's casting a wide net, and the contacts it routes, we don't know the exact location. But if you don't need to be that exact, you do have this option just based on the zip or postal code. One small addendum, zip postal code, this is North America only. So for our overseas friend, lat long is your answer. That does it for questions. So I think, 1 minute to spare. Before we all go, I mentioned a fun surprise for your homework. Get to work. This is the last step. What we want you to do is to create an intellective routing filter. Again, maybe you've done it before. Maybe you've done it while I was rambling on there, because I do tend to ramble about this feature. I mentioned that's my favorite. However, go in, create a new filter. If you create a new filter, make it advanced, by the way. Make an advanced filter. Don't be scared by it. We encourage it. Go advanced. Make some priorities, just some basic ones. Just prioritize leads that haven't been called ahead of ones that have, if that makes sense to you. And maybe filter out things that identify them as bad leads. Maybe filter out things that don't have phone numbers. Do something. All right, folks, that is going to wrap it up here. So from all of us here at VanillaSoft, but mostly from me, thank you so very much. Take care, everyone.